Welcome to the Leading at the Next Level podcast with Dove Development and Consulting, the show built to provide ongoing support for your leadership journey. Before we move into today's lesson, let's make sure we're on the same page. We've seen firsthand how much more is required to provide authentic leadership to a team than to simply manage based on the authority that comes with the title or position. What we've learned through more than 50 combined years of leadership responsibility is that taking the extra steps to serve people and earn influence will always produce results that barking orders never will. And if you'll stick with us to the end of the episode, we'll share how you can get a complimentary trial to a resource that we've built that's like nothing else you've ever seen. Now, with that in mind, let's get to work. This episode really builds on what we've looked at with profitability killers, and it's starting the process to dig into the cost of disengaged employees. Once we've been really intentional about creating a culture that's from top down and it really provides effective communication on an ongoing basis, and we've worked to really minimize the profitability that's killed by that high voluntary turnover and those ongoing recruiting costs, the next, but I don't think it's the least, any less critical, if you will, the next profitability killer that really needs our attention is this cost of disengaged employees. Now, to have any real shot at doing that, I believe we've got to have a firm understanding of how widespread this really is and how it impacts individual performance and how each of those things ultimately affect even the best members of our teams, right? So before digging through any of that, let's make sure we're on the same page. I'm not suggesting that we do everything we possibly can to make our employees happy. That's just not where it's at, nor do I believe that we can get the best long-term results by simply working to make sure employees are satisfied. Now, employee engagement is something that's completely different from either of those things. And in fact, I would go so far as to say this article that I found from Indeed, it was called How to Increase Employee Engagement, differentiated the three and kind of serves my point that I've made over and over and over again about how those three things, while they seem the same, are very, very different. The article read, employee engagement is a measurement of how committed an employee is to their employer, how passionate they are about the work they do, and how well their personal goals and values align with the mission and objectives of their employer. It goes on to say, an engaged employee is enthusiastic about working with customers and providing them services that generate profit and a good reputation. Not only that, but if your company has an engaged workforce, you're more likely to retain your current staff instead of having to frequently spend time and money hiring new employees. That article was pretty solid, but that's not it. It's got a little bit more I'll share with you here. It said it's important not to confuse employee engagement with employee satisfaction. While the two may sound similar, sound familiar? Okay, while the two may sound similar, they're actually two different concepts. A satisfied employee is someone who likes their job and feels their employer meets their needs, while an engaged employee is someone who is committed to their work, dedicated to their employer, and consistently performs at a high level. The article kind of closed, it wrapped it all up by saying, an engaged employee is always satisfied, but someone can be satisfied without being engaged. For example, an employee may be happy with the compensation and job duties, but they may not be emotionally connected to their work or loyal to their employer. Now, with that perspective in mind, I really feel like we need to understand just how widespread this idea of the lack of engagement it really is. Now, over the decade or so that I had hands-on involvement with really rolling out, initiating the surveys, the employee engagement surveys in the organizations I worked for, the message that I most frequently heard shared with me, the person that's communicating it with the workforce and so on, was that even the best organizations, the best organizations in the world, they still had close to 20% of their workforce that was actively disengaged, and only around 30% of their team was actively engaged. So the analogy that I most often used at that point in time, again, we're talking about more than a decade ago, had been one where picture 10 folks in a boat, because I could keep it simple with smaller math, and I could picture 10 folks in a rowboat. Where in this case, where we're talking about 30% of them were actively engaged, those 3 of the 10 were in the boat and they were rowing just as hard as they possibly could to get to the destination. That would be the goal, the mission, whatever. And there's 20%, if you will, in the very back of the boat who are working just as hard as they possibly can to sink the stinking boat. Okay. In the middle, however, we still have folks who may or may not be holding their oars. Maybe they're just in their lap, whatever, but they're certainly not breaking a sweat in the rowing efforts, right? They're just kind of there. Now, another article I found as I was digging through and putting this together, it was from Forbes. It was called Why the Latest Employee Engagement Statistics Are Unacceptable. Shared some numbers from Gallup's. They do this annual thing called the State of the Global Workforce Report. This was from the 22 report in a very similar manner. Here's what it shared. It said, imagine out of 100 people in your business, 21 are powerfully rowing towards your company goals. Okay, that's kind of cool. 19 are actively rowing against them. 60 people are just along for the ride, creating drag for those who are rowing forward. Okay, well, that's a little bit tougher to imagine 100 people fitting into a single rowboat, right? It still, I think, creates a pretty vivid picture. And whether we've got that world-class 30% that I referenced earlier, or just the 21% referenced in this recent study in that 2022 Global Workforce Report from Gallup, there's still a whole bunch of folks weighing down the boat that aren't doing anything to contribute, right? Fortunately, Gallup offered a solution to the crisis. It said, the real fix is simple. The best leaders in the workplace, or the real fix is simple, better leaders in the workplace. Now, by this point, if you've known me, if you've been around me for a little bit, you know I'm a fan of simple. I like it a lot. So we're going to work through some steps that we can take as leaders to build engagement, the kind of engagement we need into our organization. But before doing that, I believe we should kind of attach some dollar signs to this thing called engagement. So we've got a clear picture of how much profitability that disengagement really is killing, as well as the effect that even the 19% who are actively disengaged, what they can have on everybody else around them. Because gosh, I don't know that anybody is served well by folks actively trying to sink our boat, right? So based on those stats that I just shared with you, showing that an overwhelming majority of the workplace at large really isn't engaged in what they call, what Gallup or whichever one it was called, powerfully rowing forward toward their company's goals, the cost of disengaged employees should be fairly evident. Now, truth be told, I struggle to understand how any company can make it over the long haul with so few people. Again, 21 in that recent report, 30% of folks in the best in the world that I heard talked about. I struggle to picture how they can make it over the long haul with so many people really trying to pull the weight, or so few people pulling the weight. And that's got to contribute to why so few companies really do never make it long term. So many companies just don't make it. They go out of business. We see stats about that all the time. Now, but I still get folks, even with those numbers, question whether or not engagement is actually something tangible that shows up on the bottom line. Now, if you think back in this series and some different stuff I've done, I've shared previously several different times about a fellow that commented on a LinkedIn article that I shared a while back, where I wove those 3 things: employee engagement, employee happiness, employee satisfaction. He commented on my LinkedIn post, and he said it was really simply a fuzzy initiative driven by somebody in HR that never yields results. Now, what I'm going to challenge you to really consider here is, how many times have you been completely miserable in a position and still produced good results for months or years on end with no intention whatsoever of finding a new place to call home, a new workplace, so to speak? And now, I understand that somebody with solid character will continue to exceed expectations even when they're frustrated. Been there, done that. Sure, you have too. However, that's where the character comes into play. But I also know that the folks, when they're frustrated over time, eventually they're going to look for a new place to call home, and they're likely going to move on when that opportunity presents itself. So it's not something that's goes on indefinitely. It's something that even when they're frustrated and still exceeding expectations, it's still going to have a finite end to it, right? Now compare that, how when you're frustrated and your performance there, to the performance for the best leader that you've ever worked for or with, whichever. And I bet that even in those situations, you found a way to deliver more for them than even on your best day when you were in that role where you were frustrated. I'm not saying you were mailing it in where you're frustrated, but when that leader inspired you, you were contributing at a higher level. I have no doubt about it, because again, been there, done that. Now, with all that in mind, do you really believe that engagement is indeed some kind of fuzzy initiative that never yields results? I don't. Now, in an article I found, Harvard Business Review, it was called Things They Do for Love. It was by a lady named Leah Buchanan. It shared this. It said, company leaders won't be surprised that employee engagement, she goes on to explain it, the extent to which workers commit to something or someone in their organizations influences performance and retention, but they may be surprised by how much engagement matters. She went on with this quote. She said, increased commitment from that engagement can lead to a 57% improvement in discretionary effort. And she defined that as employees' willingness to exceed the call of duty. And she said that greater effort produces on average a 20% in individual performance improvement and an 87% reduction in desire to pull up stakes, according to the Corporate Leadership Council, which surveyed more than 50,000 employees from more than 59 organizations worldwide. So some pretty cool stats, and I'm going to circle back to a couple of those here shortly. So if we're being really honest with ourselves, we could probably relate to that increase in the discretionary effort, and we can probably tie it back to overall individual productivity, to the jobs we've had where we've truly bought into the leader that we work for. The impact those things have on an organization's profitability, even when multiplied over a group of team members, gosh, it can be huge. For now, though, let's just stick with what happens when disengagement is the norm, and who really feels the pain for that, before we dig into those numbers as much. Now, based on those numbers from Gallup's 2022 State of the Global Workforce Report, there are usually 2 more people rowing than there are trying to get the boat to sink. Now, if those who are actually working to take on water go unchecked for any real length of time, though, even being the minority, the smallest group, how do you think that's eventually going to affect the 60% of the folks who are just along for the ride, the ones in the middle, the ones that might have the oars in their lap, they're not really rowing hard, they're just kind of there, the ones that are neither actively engaged or disengaged? My guess is at some point in time, sooner or later, and probably sooner, a few of them are going to fall in with the crowd and say, gosh, they're getting away with it, let's sink the boat ourselves. And it's going to perpetually be that way until either the folks who are actively rowing stop or they leave, one of the two. And as more and more people are working to sink the boat, how many of the rowers do you think are going to be engaged and wanting to continue pulling them along? And we could even ask that as a society, but that's not the purpose for here today. The 60, who are often, by so many different articles you read today, dubbed those quiet quitters, they could be a tremendous resource for the organization, but instead we've allowed them, and I stress, we've allowed them to become a drain on the entire team they're part of, for the customers, the clients, and the whole organization, right? And the people that are charged with leading them, it's a drain on them too. And gosh, don't miss the fact that it impacts every family that counts on that organization to sustain them, be that through a paycheck or through the products and services they yield. So let's put some dollar signs now. Before we move on to how to fix it, let's put some dollar signs into how this whole engagement thing really impacts it, and how leadership can help change that engagement to capture those dollar signs. So that fellow I mentioned on the LinkedIn article, I've never mentioned his name. My goal wasn't to call him out, albeit if it would have been, I'd have just said his name and we'd have went at it. But whatever. I've apparently used this that reference in enough different things that I believe he deleted the comment from the Indeed article or the LinkedIn article rather, that I wrote. So here or there. But my point was really to say, hey, what he shared wasn't necessarily something that a lot of other executives didn't think. It was just something that he said out loud that most people don't say out loud. So as we're working through it, let's keep in mind that it's not it's not an uncommon thing for people to feel like it's intangible or it's fuzzy or whatever. But gosh, I'd probably feel that way too if I hadn't been held extremely accountable to produce those results throughout my career and make sure that I could point to the impact they made on the bottom line. And again, I'll say it was never easy, but I'm thankful that that challenge was always held out there. That expectation was held out there. But let's be honest. In many organizations, and in my own experience, the vast majority of the consultants or the trainers that I dealt with in my corporate career, gosh, they'd come in, they'd run through their can talk, they'd show a couple flashy slides, then they'd hop back in their rental car, and they didn't even act like they gave a shit if somebody did anything different. They could care less as long as they got their paycheck and they could go on about their lives and look fun and drive cool cars or whatever it was they did. Now, with that being almost the norm for what I saw with the outside consultants and trainers, I do my best to be patient with those comments about the fuzzy initiatives and those touchy-feely concepts, because so many times that's what a trainer or consultant or in some cases the HR folks, that's what they've laid out there for us. But I also, when I hear them, I'm going to respond with statistics and results. And that's what I want you to be able to do as well as we work through this. So let's get down to business and let's look at some very, very specific numbers that I think can make a strong case for showing that employee engagement is absolutely not fuzzy. And it is absolutely something that if we do it right, we can add it back to our bottom lines. We can take care of that profitability killer and we can capture it so it makes a positive impact on the organizations we're part of. So let's consider each of those three areas that I just shared from that Harvard Business Review article that suggested the engagement would improve significantly, the things that would improve significantly with engagement, the 57% improvement in discretionary effort, the 20% in individual performance improvement, and that 87% reduction in desire to pull up stakes. Now, we're going to run the numbers. I want to do it based on a 100-person company, just so we can, and we're also going to stick with some very, very conservative figures from some different stats I'll pull here. And then you can take that 100 and you can do the math. If you're in a company of 600, multiply it. If you're in a company of 50, divide it. Do what you need to do to relate it, but the 100 should give us a baseline and for something that you may or may not have ever captured before. So with that 87%, we'll start with the last 87% reduction in desire to pull up stakes. What if we changed it? What if we could increase engagement and we only yielded a 50% reduction in voluntary turnover? What if it only cut it in half as opposed to 87%? Now, if you think back to what I shared a while back when we talked about how much profitability is killed by high turnover and so on, you might remember me referencing a Gallup study that I think is really dated now, where they based it on a $35,000 average annual salary in an organization. And I can't say that I know any, because that's just over 14 bucks an hour, right? Maybe 16, 17 bucks an hour, but there aren't many organizations today that have that as an average. It said the average turnover could cost a 100-person firm between $438,000 and $4 million a year to replace employees. The average turnover at that point in time. So if we could cut about 50%, let's say we're improving engagement. What if improving our engagement could add $200,000 in profit back to the bottom line, or whatever number that would be adjusted for the size of your company? But for this 100-person firm, let's use 200,000 as our number. And again, I think that's very conservative because it's the lowest numbers in the study, and that study is very, very dated at this point based on that $35,000 average salary within the companies. Now, I'm guessing just that $200,000 extra profit in a company of 100 people, that's taking some of the fuzziness away from the equation, isn't it? Now, I won't bother trying to tie in a number to that 57% improvement in discretionary effort. But again, I'm going to ask you to think about how much harder you've been willing to work for the best leader that you've ever reported to, or maybe not even reported to, but worked with. Now, with that in mind, I do want to connect that extra that you've been willing to do, just like I have. I want to connect that directly to that 20% improvement in individual performance, right? But not to the entire workforce. Since most companies, they've already got between 20 and 30% of their team members who already are actively engaged. I don't think it's fair to expect them to continue to do more and more and more. That's what happens too often. That's not where we're going here. What I would like to do, though, is look at that middle percent, because let me skip that for a second and say, I also don't want to factor in that 20% that's actively disengaged, because I would go so far as to say if they're actively disengaged, we should maybe be working to move them out of the equation as opposed to trying to talk them into picking up the rewards and just rolling for all they can, because I think that's going to waste a lot of our breath. Like I say, what we want to do here is look at how much more profitable we could be if just half, if just 50%, we could help them increase their individual performance. Instead of that full 60, what if we could get half to just increase their individual performance by just 10% rather than that full 20% that the article suggested? What if just half? What if 50% increased by 10? So for simplicity, let's say we've got a 100-person firm and we're doing 10 million in annual revenue. And let's say that historically we've operated at a 10% profit margin, realizing somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1 million in profit a year. So that's still low. Most organizations are going to see in a 20+% at that level. So it's going to be a little bit higher. The revenue is probably a little bit higher, but let's just pretend 1 million is that annual profit. Simple enough so far, right? I could easily make a case for suggesting that the 20 to 30 people that are actively engaged, that they're the ones responsible for the vast majority of that profit that we're seeing. But I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to say, even if we were to spread it out across the entire team, and we figure in that 10% increase from just 50 of our folks who weren't actively engaged before, or not even counting the actively disengaged, we're looking at an additional 500,000 in volume of capacity that comes in somewhere around that, and that much less in total cost, right? And we're going to have about the same fixed cost because we're still producing in the same facility. We're still producing with the same number of people. It's just an increase in performance. And if we're producing more, there could, for the sake of this, be 10 to 20% more going to raw material costs, but that still leaves us more than $300,000 in increased profitability. And again, I think we're being very, very conservative with the numbers. Now, what if I'm only half right? What if the 200 we looked at before, what if we cut that in half and we cut this 300 in half again? What if we're only half right and we only captured an extra $250,000 in profit? Now, I'm not real great at this, but I'm going to say, if that investment, if we do those things and that investment pays a dividend year after year after year, I'll say that I've not seen a payback like that in all the years that I was involved in lean implementations, continuous improvement events, and so on, because in many cases, those might see a 3, 4, 5% payback, and they weren't always sustainable. If this one's one that we do, if we can build that into our culture and let it perpetuate, we've got a huge tangible number that we capture back in our profit over and over and over, just by putting together the effective leadership that can drive this type of engagement.
Thanks for listening to the Leading at the Next Level podcast. Next time, we'll pick up where we left off by digging into how effective leadership drives employee engagement. If you'd like to go deeper into anything we shared here, or you need continuing education credits for your professional credential, send us an email, admin@dove-development.net, and we'll be happy to hook you up with a 45-day all-access trial to our complete Leading at the Next Level program at no cost. The full program includes access to well over 100 hours of digital lessons, complete with slides and action-based assessments to help you capture measurable bottom-line improvements in your organization. And it includes access to 2 live lessons each month that close with Q&A, so we can help you identify the specific action you want to take to lead your team more effectively.